Ronnie, you spoke in the United Nations. How was that whole episode?
Whoa, that was another learning lesson. Um, this was also in the 90s. It was like 1999. And remember the knowledge sheets that Gurudev used to, would come out once a week? They'd be faxed to all the countries around the world. And we would sit with Gurudev on a Thursday, and he'd say, what should the knowledge sheet be this week? And people would throw out ideas, and we'd discuss it, and the knowledge sheet would come together. Well, one time, in the middle of that knowledge in the middle of doing the knowledge sheet, Guruji just turned. There were about 20 of us sitting in Verna Suarez's living room in Los Angeles with Gurudev at the time. And he just turned and he looked at me and he said, Ronnie, you should go speak at the United Nations. And when Guruji tells you to do something, you do it. And so it was arranged that I would address the United Nations NGO Health Committee on, the first research was just coming out at that point, on Sudarshan Kriya, and that I was going to go speak at the United Nations, and it was arranged on this particular topic. And I was so nervous. It took me a really long time to prepare my talk and prepare the slides. And my parents lived in the suburbs of New York on what's called Long Island. And to save art of living money, so I didn't have to stay in a hotel, I stayed with my parents on Long Island. And I was really nervous before going. And somehow, I don't know how Guruji found out where I was, but the phone rang and it was Guruji. And he said to me, so what are you going to say? And so I told him what, the input that I'd gotten from different people about what I should say. And he said, no, too airy-fairy. He said, you talk about this, 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 and this. And then he paused and he said to me, Ronnie, this is the highest knowledge on the planet. And even though these are big delegates at the United Nations, they're like kindergarten children for this knowledge, and they're waiting for it. So you go and give it to them. And really, it put a whole different perspective on things. That, this is just about bringing the knowledge of enlightenment, which is there in every tradition, sometimes more clear, sometimes more obscure. This is the knowledge of unfoldment of full potential that everybody is looking for. This is the basis, really, this is the basis of true physical and mental health in the world. And so if I'm addressing the health committee, we need to talk about where health springs from. What is the full potential? So I, redid my proposal, and then the next day I went to the United Nations, and it had been arranged by the chair of the health committee that the three speakers, it was me and a gentleman named Mehmet Oz, who those of you in North America know, he's a famous doctor in the United States who's written New York Times bestsellers, and he has his own TV show, and he's like a health guru in the United States. And so I was on a panel with him and one other physician. And they invited us, to have lunch in the delegates' dining room beforehand, because our presentation was after that. And while we're sitting in the dining room, everybody is having a great time, and they're, joking and laughing. And I'm pretending to follow along, but in my head, I'm so nervous. I'm practicing my talk over and over and barely paying attention to anything anybody is saying, and could hardly swallow the food. I just still was so nervous, despite applying the knowledge and the ego seeing technique, the technique, to the best of my ability. I went into the bathroom and did 1,000 of them, and I was still nervous. So anyway, we get into the hall where the presentation is going to be, and I'm sitting with the other speakers and the moderator, maybe 50 feet from the podium that has the big logo of the United Nations on it. It's really daunting. And my heart was pounding so strongly that I actually looked down at my shirt to see if my shirt was moving. I had never experienced anything like that. And I was concerned that people might be able to see how nervous I was. They might be able to see my chest pounding. That's how nervous I was. And also, while I was sitting there, I attempted to review my talk one more time in my head. My mind was blank. I couldn't remember a thing. And I'm not talking about just like the subtle nuances or jokes I was planning to put in here and there to keep it lively. I could not remember the main points. First, I'm going to say this, then I'm going to say this, then I'm going to show this research, then I'm going to show this, then I could not remember one word of my talk or the flow of my talk or the content of my talk. And I remember sitting there thinking, oh well, this is a happening. Gurudev sent me to speak at the United Nations. He obviously wanted me to be here. I don't know why. I have no idea if anything is going to come out of my mouth. This is a happening, and I let go. What else could I do? And then they, introduced me. And between the time that I stood up from my seat and walked the 50 feet to the podium, like halfway there, Gurudev plugged me in. And all of a sudden, it was like, there was like this bolt of energy and clarity. And because I had surrendered and let go and was just being with the knowledge to the best of my capacity at the time, which was really only remembering present moment is inevitable and let go, that in that little crack, the Guru Tattva principle burst in. And instead of being just an overwhelming experience, it was overwhelmingly wonderful. And I went up to the podium and the entire talk came back into my head. And I gave the whole talk, and it was like it wasn't even me. It was like I was a puppet, and Gurudev was speaking through me. It was just a remarkable experience. It was so wonderful. And then after the presentation, after it was done, there was a question and answer period. And one of the other speaker, the third speaker, didn't get a single question. Dr. Oz got one question. And every other question was directed to me about Sudarshan Kriya. I mean, it was just so amazing, the response that we got, to the point that when we had to clear the room for the next meeting that was happening in that room with the United Nations podium and the whole thing, people wouldn't leave. It was like we were like Art of Living was a rock star. It was like they flopped like a rock. I mean, they couldn't get enough of it. And I was invited to attend this NGO meeting and that meeting and this press conference. Like they wouldn't let us go. And to the point that the security guards started flashing the lights for people to leave. And then they blacked out the room. They turned off the lights completely because they couldn't get people to leave the room. And that night, there was so much Shakti, so much energy running through me. I slept in a devotee's home in New York City, and I went to all these other UN meetings the next day. And even like being up the whole night, and it was just marvelous, miraculous. It was in such ease, and it was so effortless and so joyful. And after that whole day again, then I got onto the train to go back to my parents' house on Long Island. And as soon as the train pulled out of New York City, it was like somebody took a pin and burst a balloon. Like, I was like, all the energy was gone. It was like Guruji unplugged me. It was truly, truly phenomenal that when you let go, the divine is always there with you. And the next time I saw Gurudev was at the Canadian ashram. And as soon as he saw me, he said, because I hadn't talked to him afterward or, anything, he said, Ronnie took the United Nations by storm. Because he was so there and saw the reactions and saw the response. And so it really gave me the confidence that no matter what happens, Guruji is with us. We just have to leave a little opening. Like if we leave an opening this big, he comes in this big. It's so amazing.
Ronnie, you also had a chance to travel with Gurudev to different gurus.
Yes.
How was that experience?
Again, remarkable. There were 5 of us who Guruji invited to travel with him to the ashram of a very renowned guru who had, at that time, he must have had 5 times as many devotees as Guruji. And there's so many things came up in that time. One of them was that Guruji actually took the time to introduce each of the 5 of us to this other Guru as with such praise. You know, Guruji says the first spiritual law is start praising others and start praising yourself. The praise he was heaping on each one of us, like we were the leaders of nations. You know, Shirley Harmison had just been he had just started making advanced course teachers, because up until that point, there were no tapes of Hollow and Empty, and the only way you could do an advanced course was with Gurudev. And then when he started making teachers, Shirley was probably the third in North America, the third advanced course teacher. So when he introduced Shirley, he said, and Shirley is the, you know, has just been made an advanced course teacher, and Ronnie is heading up our research. I mean, just heaping so much praise on us. It was absolutely amazing. And then what happened is that Guruji and this other guru went for a walk where they wanted to speak privately. And so Guruji said, everybody, you go rest, you go entertain yourselves. You know, this is our time. And so some people went and got massages at their Ayurvedic center, and some of us went and did yoga, and other people were just sitting in nature. We were all spread out, the five of us, in different places in this Guru's ashram, because we were welcome as honored guests. And all of a sudden, at some point, for some reason, I had the impulse with the person who was doing yoga with me to just get up from the yoga mat and look out the window for some crazy reason in the middle of our yoga. And we look out and we see Guruji and the other guru walking through the ashram. And there was not a thought in the head, not a memory that he said, you know, this is our time. And so we quickly got dressed and put on our, you know, grabbed our chappals and went running out to be with Guruji. And it was like from every direction, from 5 different directions, all 5 of us ran to be with Guruji. And very respectfully, we were walking like, you know, 5 steps behind him. And also walking behind that guru, the only other person who was far back was the secretariat of that guru. And he turned to us and said, you guys have amazing guru radar. And then he also said, and you don't know how fortunate you are. With our guru, we are not allowed to approach him unless formally invited. And so it really drove home again how incredibly blessed we are to have a guru who is so accessible and so incredibly loving. And during that trip as well, Guruji's mother, Amma, was also traveling with Gurudev at that point. And this other guru was a married guru. He was a householder guru. And they invited us, Amma and this guru's wife invited us. Guruji was so gracious and so caring of us that they invited us. They cooked lunch for the 5 of us, and for Guruji and for this other guru. And we were invited to this other guru's kutir to have lunch, and Gurudev and the other guru were, you know, sitting off. And then the other 5 of us were sitting at the table, and they had made us this incredible lunch with so much love. And again, Guruji was praising each one of us as if we had done so much. And really the reality was that we were, I was so new to this, that what happened is I'm left-handed. And I know that, you know, when you're eating communally, in the Indian tradition, you eat with the right hand, and the left hand, you know, everything becomes like untouchable to other people if you put your left hand into the common dish. And so to not make a mistake, I actually sat on my left hand the entire time so I wouldn't make that mistake. And then after the meal, we all went to satsang with that guru, and they just welcomed Guruji so royally. It was so sweet. And they garlanded him. And the other guru actually invited Guruji to teach all of the devotees at his ashram Sudarshan Kriya, which we didn't know at the time, but afterward, when we were walking with Guruji afterward, as Guruji was leaving, as we were all leaving the ashram, Guruji mentioned that that the other guru had invited him to teach everybody at his ashram Sudarshan Kriya, and that Guruji declined. And what he said was, their path is a legitimate path. And if they learn the Kriya, and then they start feeling devotion for me, it will create conflict in their mind. And there's no need for conflict. Those who are destined to be with me will find me anyway. And what happened is one of the people who was at that ashram came running over to me as Guruji was leaving and had said that he had learned Sudarshan Kriya and that some other spiritual organization had told him, no, it's bad, you shouldn't do it. And he, not this guru's ashram, but another guru had said, no, don't do that, it's no good. And yet he was feeling so drawn to it and he just wanted to really be with Guruji. And so I said to him, come, you know, talk to Guruji. And Guruji was in the car, you know, his car was about to leave. And I came with this other young boy, this young man, up to the car, and Guruji rolled down the window. And this gentleman started to kneel by the car. So his knees were resting on the side of the car. And he was like kneeling with so much love at Guruji. And, you know, basically asking Guruji for blessings that it was okay with it for him to be with Gurudev. And, you know, it just so reminds me of how Guruji says that an enlightened master is not interested in numbers, is not interested in gaining anything or getting devotees, that those who come to him are meant to be there. And it was so obvious in this interaction, and just so sweet and so gracious how Guruji was every moment of the time there. And I really treasure those moments.
Ronnie, you have been to so many conferences. You have represented Art of Living in so many conferences. Was there any incidents or an instance where you were criticized for your views?
Oh, yes. And this was not at a conference. What happened is at a conference, some very prestigious, fairly famous medical people were very impressed with our data, you know, our research data, and they became somewhat involved with our organization but started recommending things that were very clear to me were not in line with Gurudev's treatment. But it was just me and Patty Montella, who's another old timer. And if you haven't interviewed her, you definitely need to. Another old timer. The two of us felt that there was something really off with this. And what happened is I became the target or the focal point for a lot of negative, basically all of the leadership in the organization in the United States at that time was seeing things differently than me and criticizing me and telling me, you know, get with the program. These people can do so much good for Art of Living. They're so famous. They can put us on the map, blah, 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 blah. But I really saw a danger. And it was just like, you know how Gurudev says, you know, if you have a leg pain and everybody tells you don't have a leg pain, and they show you, and you know, even if they show you x-rays, look, you don't have any pain. You know you have a pain, you know you have a pain. And that was my experience. And I couldn't let it go. I felt my responsibility to the holy tradition, to Gurudev, to this knowledge, was to stand up. And I was getting mercilessly beaten. And at the same time, a lot of people were saying a lot of negative things about me. And what it did is it brought up sort of the football of other people's opinion, but also I started questioning. My own insecurity came up, my own, you know, that my sadhana wasn't complete. I began to be concerned about my relationship with Guruji, like what are these people saying to Guruji? And so you're correct, we were at a conference in Boston, and I was presenting the research on Sudarshan Kriya again. And afterward, before the next event, I had a private meeting with Guruji, which at that point was not so difficult. And I went in and, you know, you just have to, present moment is inevitable. And, you know, Guruji says truth is being with what is, and surrender is simply being with what is. And so I just surrendered to my insecurities. And I said to him, because I had to ask him, I said, Guruji, I need to know. I said, I'm embarrassed to ask you this because I'm afraid it shows lack of faith. But I need to know in words of one syllable that no matter what people say about me, no matter what mistakes I make, you won't abandon me and you won't stop loving me. And he just looked at me with such sweetness and he slapped me on the back, which was wonderful because at that point he wasn't touching women. And every time I'd see him at the airport and he'd slap somebody on the back, I think, oh God, I wish he would do that to me. I wish he would do that to me. And he did it at that moment. And then he's looked at me and he said, Ronnie, they have already said those things about you. And then he confided in me and he said, those people could create a lot of problems for Art of Living, and it's important that I keep them close. And then he continued when I said to him, because I also said to him, because one of the senior people in Art of Living had said, Ronnie, you've been doing this for so long that, everybody's in this way and you see something that you don't think is right and you say something. He said, do you really think that God needs you to do this, that the Holy Tradition needs you to do this? He said, you should ask Guruji because you're getting beat up and it may be for nothing. Maybe, and so I asked Guruji and I asked him that exact thing. I said, I was told to ask you, that when I see this happens, that when people do things that look, not in alignment with the Holy Tradition and I stand up to bring it back to alignment, I get beat up. And it's really painful. I said, but it's okay because I felt like this is what I'm supposed to do. But is this unnecessary or is this my role? And he looked at me like he was surprised that I even asked. And he pointed his finger. He doesn't usually point. He pointed his finger at me and he said, Ronnie, you be watchdog. And so he gave me my marching papers. And so from that moment on, no matter if I was criticized, if I was ridiculed, it didn't matter. It didn't matter. He totally took it away. And he did it with such, again, he has always, every interaction, except one, which I'll tell you about in a minute, has been with just such incredible sweetness and care. How wonderful is that?
Coming to that interaction you just mentioned,
Yeah, okay. So as I mentioned, when I came to Art of Living, I had substantial health problems. And at one point, I went to the first time when we first got the ashram in Canada, I think it was like 2000, around 2000, 2001, something like that. I went for the first Ayurvedic session that they had at the ashram, and I realized that I didn't listen to Guruji. Because what happened is I was sitting on the couch. At those days, we used to call Guruji, like if it was our birthday or whatever, we would just call Guruji. And so I was sitting on the couch with the senior teacher in our area, whose birthday it was. He used my phone to call Guruji, for his birthday. And then he said to Guruji, and Ronnie is going to the Ayurvedic clinic in Canada. And so Guruji said, let me speak with Ronnie. And he passed the phone over to me. And Guruji said, the Vaidya from India did not get his visa, so he's not coming. So they're just having somebody, an Ayurvedic doctor from Canada come, and it's really not going to be the same. And I realized after the fact that he was trying to save me and dissuade me from going. But then I said to him, Guruji, I already bought my plane ticket. And he said, all right, then go. And I went and I broke out. We were in the learning phase. And so there was no, pre-cleansing or anything. And I broke out in like 100 sores. I had like sores all over me. I was miserable. It was like my skin was coming. I was so miserable. And when Guruji finally got to the Canadian ashram, the last day, I went into the kutir because somebody, one of the other teachers at the ashram said to me, Guruji says that a healthy body is the birthright of every human being. You've been suffering for 20 years now. You go and go ahead, go demand your health. So I went into the kutir, and this was at the Canadian ashram. I went into the kutir, and I just said to him, like really, without any gratitude, I just said, Guruji, exactly like this, Guruji, do I deserve to be healthy? And he just turned his head like this, like he couldn't even look at me. And he just said to me, Ronnie, you need to be more grateful, because if you hadn't clung so tightly to your practices all of these years, your meditation and your asanas and your pranayama and your teaching, you would have been bedridden for the last 13 years. So you need to be grateful. You can even move your arms and legs. So he scolded me, and I got it. And so now I want to fast forward a couple years down the line where, it says that when the karma is up, the doctor appears. And I was told about a special doctor, remarkable doctor, in another state. And I went to see her, and I believe she was a Dhanvantri. And for those of you who don't know, the Dhanvantri is in the Ayurvedic hospital in India, there's a huge statue of the Dhanvantri in the lobby. And the Dhanvantri is the being that is responsible for upholding the health of humanity. And I believe that this particular doctor, who did the best of East and West and everything, was a Dhanvantri. Really remarkable woman. And so I went to her clinic, and what she did was live blood cell analysis in a way that's different than just about anybody I'd ever heard of did, where she had this microscope that magnified things, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of times, and she hooked it up to a large screen TV. And so as she was looking at your blood and seeing what was actually happening in real time in your body, she would describe it. And so first she looked at the white blood cells, the immune cells. And she showed me, literally, I could see parasites swimming through my bloodstream. And I could see, I had a really bad case of candida. She said it was the second worst case she'd ever seen in somebody who was still alive. And we saw, the human body is incredible. And some of the immune cells looked like Christmas lights. There were these balls that were bouncing in my bloodstream. And I thought they were magnificent. And she said, but Ronnie, they're paralyzed, they're frozen, they're supposed to be chemotaxing, they're supposed to be moving and doing their job. And while your body is producing them, they're not acting, they're frozen. And she, talked about everything that was wrong with me. And I was so disheartened. And then she said, okay, let's look at what your red blood cells are doing. And so she, turned the microscope and focused on something else in the blood. And then she just paused and she put her head down like this. And at that point, and she didn't say a word. And at that point, I just started crying because I thought, oh no, what next? How could it be any worse? And then she looked at me and she said, Ronnie, this is not in the medical textbooks, but I have seen it before in people who are deeply spiritual. She actually had treated other gurus, and people from spiritual communities all over the world had found out about her and had come to her for treatment. And so she said, this is not in the medical textbooks, but I have seen it before in people who are deeply spiritual. And around every one of my red blood cells was a huge halo of white light. And she said to me later that it was the white light, that the electromagnetic charge of the white light that was keeping me alive. And so in our language, we would say it was the grace of the Guru that was keeping me alive. And then what she said was, then I had a consult with her and the other physicians at this clinic. And she said to me, given the debilitated state of your body and of all of the systems, everything that's going on in your system, we are amazed that you can even move your arms and legs. The same exact words that Gurudev had said to me several years before. And so the kindness and the grace of the Guru is with us always, whether we see it or whether we don't. Can't imagine. In fact, can I share one other thing with you that Guruji said? I remember being on a TRM, a teacher's course with Gurudev, and somebody said to Guruji, feeling great devotion, they said, Guruji, what did we do to deserve to be here with you? And his response was, you didn't do anything to earn it. If this could be earned, it wouldn't be worth anything. This is simply divine grace.